Thank you for the clarity and the honesty with which you spoke to us. I'm really pleased now that Jason Cowley is going to say a few words. Jason is the editor of The New Statesman. Under his editorship, I think it has become the weekly magazine of the pluralist left, and Compass feels a great affinity with The New Statesman. So, Jason, thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. As Neil said, I'm Jason Cowley, editor of The New Statesman. It's great to see so many of you here today on a Saturday in June and a World Cup day. I see a gentleman in the front there is wearing an England shirt. I presume that's for later on this evening. Caroline, great honour to follow you, and wonderful that you were our first Green MP. When I became editor of The New Statesman in the autumn of 2008 it was, I kept being asked whether I was a Brownite or a Blairite. Whose camp was I in? Who was my sponsor? I didn't have a Westminster background, nor had I worked in the lobby, and I was rather dismayed by all of this. I found it very tedious. So what I thought I'd do is I thought I'd try and remake The New Statesman, not as the in-house journal of the Labour Party, as it has sometimes been perceived, but as a magazine of ideas, repositioning it somewhere in the space between, say, The Guardian, but without the flip-flops on policy that we're seeing. I apologise if anyone from The Guardian's here. I could continue to riff, but time's tight. And a magazine, and some of the more rightly American magazines, such as the old Atlantic Monthly or something like that. And what I began to do for our leader columns and for essays and articles was to demand a progressive realignment of the centre-left, a more pluralistic politics, far-reaching reform, constitutional and economic reform. We published signature essays from people inside Labour but also outside Labour, people who shared our vision for a more pluralistic politics. Neil Lawson and John Harris's signature manifesto essay, No Turning Back, contributions from the likes of Amartya Sen, Richard Reeves, John Cruddas, Jonathan Rutherford, James Purnell, Stuart White, and others. Following the fall of the second Labour government, R.H. Tawney wrote a famous essay, published in Political Quarterly, entitled The Choice Before Labour. He complained that the degeneration, his word, the degeneration of socialist parties on assuming office was an old story. And what the party needed was not self-commiseration, but a little cold realism. Labour, Tawney wrote, is hesitant in action because divided in mind. It does not achieve what it could because it does not know what it wants. It frets out of office and fumbles in it. He went on, being without clear convictions as to its own meaning and purpose, it is deprived of the dynamic which only convictions supply. That was 1931, and it sounds rather familiar, doesn't it? And if you think back to 1931 as well, conditions similar to today, financial crash, recession, political realignment, coalition government. Much earlier in 1909, Charles Masterman had published his great book, The Condition of England. Now, Masterman was a Liberal MP, close friend of Winston Churchill, so he was writing from within the establishment, but he'd been radicalised by his work with the urban poor in London. He was appalled by the growing inequality that he saw around him. And he understood, too, that England, as he called it, not Britain, England was suspended between the old Victorian world and something quite new. He thought it was a period of profound unease and transition. And he wrote of how the man who is living amid the long-drawn decline is wandering between two worlds, one dead, the other powerless to be born. It is an aging passing. What is coming to replace it, Masterman asked. No one knows. Where does it come to? Where are we going? Again, no one knows. Today, it feels to me that we're very much in a similar point of transition. In an essay this week in The New Statesman, Neil quotes Gramsci and this notion of the interregnum, this pause between something about to happen. Couldn't go on for a long time, this pause. But it does feel to me that we're very much, ours is an age in passing, similar to what Masterman identified. And I think we're suspended between two worlds. The old dead world of the New Labour period, with its fatal embrace of neoliberalism, and a new politics of hope. I genuinely believe that, a new politics of hope. Once more, the choice is clear before Labour. And here's where I agree with Neil on the Compass Project and with Caroline Lucas. It's a choice between tribalism or pluralism. A pluralism which is about the dispersal of power and opportunity, and which embraces a more republican notion of freedom. Freedom from state domination, freedom from arbitrary power, you know, the surveillance state, all of the things that we saw under New Labour. So that's where we are, tribalism or the new pluralism. And I know which side I'm on. I hope some of you have been reading The New Statesman. If you haven't, I hope you will, and I hope some of you will come to me with ideas to write for the magazine and also for our website, newstatesman.com, which I've launched. I want to wish you well. I hope you have a good day today, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Jason. We're now going to hear from Nick Dearden. Nick is the director of the Jubilee Debt Campaign. Him and his team work to end the scandal of poor countries paying out for rich countries. The Jubilee Debt Campaign is exactly the kind of organisation Compass must work with if we want to create our kind of progressive alliance. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you very much, Neil, and it's a real pleasure to be here on this platform and at this conference today, because speaking personally, it really represents for me the two highlights of general election night. First of all, Caroline's election in Brighton Pavilion, and secondly, the absolute defeat of the British National Party in Dagenham and Stoke-on-Trent. And I know how hard Compass and many of you in the room worked to get that amazing victory in Dagenham. But as good as those two results are, they're really, and Stoke-on-Trent, but as good as those two results are, they're really too little, much too little, given that we are 2 years into the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. And I think part of the reason for that is that the left, the progressive movement, whatever you want to call it broadly, is still in the mindset of the last 30 years. I don't think it's that people out there aren't interested in the solutions we have to offer, but that they can't hear them. And it's really important that they do hear them, because this is our opportunity to overturn the inhuman economic model that has dominated this world for the last 30 years. As Neil said, I'm from an organisation which challenges a central element of that economic model, neoliberalism, which is third world debt. And for people who don't know, third world debt was built up in the 1970s when Western banks saw they could make a profit by lending out vast sums of money to third world countries, including all manner of unsavoury and dictatorial regimes that were propped up by these loans. And then at the end of the 1970s, the banks turned around to those countries and increased interest rates massively so they became unpayable. This, if you like, was the original toxic debt, the original subprime lending. And rather, of course, than the financiers taking responsibility for what they'd done, the international institutions like the International Monetary Fund came in and bailed the banks out. A private crisis was turned into a public crisis, and it was the poorest in the world who took the pain through 20 years of foregone development as their economies were sent down the pan by those international institutions. Sounds very familiar. Well, we can learn a thing or two from what happened in Africa and Latin America in the 1980s and 1990s. As a result of that economic system, of those debts, of the austerity that was imposed on country after country in the developing world, over 50 countries went backwards in terms of their human development, things like maternal mortality and literacy and the age people can be expected to live to. Now, this doesn't happen outside of wars and natural disasters. Countries don't go backwards in terms of human development, but they did in their dozens in the 1980s and 90s because of this economic system that we call neoliberalism. And as a nice side benefit for the rulers of the world, these tiresome countries of the non-aligned bloc that have been making such a fuss in the United Nations throughout the 1970s, trying to finally free themselves from dependency on their one-time colonial masters, well, they were marginalized as well. They were disempowered. And the governments of those countries became subservient to the diktats of the international markets, of the trade rules, and of the needs to service this unbelievable and growing amount of debt. And the result of this is all around us. The result of this is a world of gaping inequality, where billions of people are toiling their lives away in a misery that Marx and Engels would not have been unfamiliar with when they were writing about the slums of Manchester in the 19th century. While half a world away, others live in a luxury unparalleled in human history. And of course, that's affected us here in the UK as well, on a different scale, of course. But we can see all around us the way that neoliberalism, this idea that every element of humanity and life and the world around us can be commodified and packaged up and bought and sold for a profit, we can see how that's led to defeat and disempowerment and disenfranchisement everywhere we look.